Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman, recorded live at Earthing Studios in sunny California.
Yes, thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about leaving behind a legacy of stuff. And then we've got a lightning round question about what you would leave behind if you died today. That's followed by our Right Here, Right Now segment and a listener tip for you. You can check out the Maximal edition of episode 455. That's the full 2-hour episode where we answer twice as many questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now. Patreon.com/The Minimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Our phone number is 406-219-7839 or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Arnold.
Hi guys, I am Arnaud calling from Paris, France. I listen to you every week and I'm very much into rewilding. I have a non-profit project called Into the Rewild that you can check on our website, intotherewild.org. My question is about minimalism and legacy, and more specifically about the leave no trace philosophy. I am a minimalist also for ecological reasons, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on minimalism and the idea of leaving no trace. Thank you.
So, Alabama, I wanted this question to be first. When you played it for me, I thought we could do an interesting episode about legacy, because he's talking about legacy here. And so I kind of see two underlying questions here. One's about rewilding and also leaving no trace in your wake. But then there's a broader question about the implications of leaving behind a legacy, or what are the minimalists' thoughts on legacy? Which one of those do you want to start with, TK?
Oh, man. Well, I'll just start by giving a little context on that, where I think of legacy as what you leave behind. But typically we make a distinction between conversations we have about legacy and conversations we have about stuff. We generally think of legacy in terms of your political impact or your economic footprint, or maybe the spiritual residue that you leave behind. So you think of someone like MLK or Gandhi, that's a certain type of legacy. JFK, that's a certain type of legacy. How will people remember you? How will our lives look differently because of the sheer fact that you walk this earth and showed up in a certain kind of way? And what's fascinating to me about legacy is that it becomes a space where clutter is possible as much as anything else. One can live their lives in fear that I won't have a legacy. One can over-prioritize legacy so much that it gets in the way of the kind of lifestyle that might be necessary to produce a desirable legacy. One can be afraid that they may be misunderstood when they're gone, so that their legacy could get tarnished by elements that they can't control. And so what's most fascinating to me about legacy is it's just like anything else. It's like money, it's like material possessions, it's like relationships. Depending on how you look at it and relate to it, it can become a source of clutter and confusion in your life.
I think about that in my own life. For the longest time, I would ask, like, what do I want my legacy to be, right? But I think there was a question beneath that question is, what can I do so that people don't forget me? And there was a fear there, the fear of being forgotten. And if I'm forgotten, who am I?
Wow.
But then as I panned out a little bit, I realized that on a long enough timeline, everything is dust, right? We'll all be forgotten. And so leaving behind a legacy might be for the next generation or two, or maybe even 10 generations. But at some point, people are going to stop reading everything that remains on a long enough timeline. It might be 100 years from now. It might be 1,000 years from now. It might be 100,000 years from now. But whatever it is, on a long enough timeline, there is no legacy. It's like the ripples. And so now I think about legacy as throwing the stone into the lake. There will be ripples. But the other side of that is, what kind of ripples do I want to leave behind? But that's a bit of a fallacy as well. If I throw a stone, I can't say, I'm going to throw the stone because I want 17 ripples to then follow it. I don't really get to determine that. I throw the stone, and then whatever ripples form based on the way that I threw it, those ripples form. And that is the legacy of the stone throw. But getting back to Arnold's question specifically with rewilding and leaving no trace behind, you said legacy is what you leave behind. Mm-hmm. But that also includes what you don't leave behind. Mm-hmm. At our live events, people often come up and they'll say, I'm getting rid of my stuff. I'm in my 50s now. I'm in my 60s now. I'm in my 70s. I remember in San Diego, about a decade ago, we had a woman who was in her 90s, and she brought several generations of granddaughters with her. She said, I'm finally simplifying my life. She was like 93 or 94 years old. And she was simplifying because what she wanted to leave behind was not a legacy of stuff. She didn't want to burden the people after her with her things that they may not want. So she started having conversations with them. Is there anything that you would like now? Is there anything that I still need now that you'd like once I'm gone? And her legacy had just as much to do with what she was leaving behind as the things she wasn't leaving behind. She didn't want to leave behind a burden for the people she loved.
I think about my grandfather from Mississippi who spent the last 50 years of his life blind. It happened during an accident. He was a mechanic, and while fixing a car, an accident happened that resulted in him being blind for the rest of his life. And he did not leave me or any of his grandchildren with great wealth. None of us can move about in the world with more political or economic clout because of the life that he lived. But what he did leave behind is so immeasurably valuable. He left behind a quiet dignity. He left behind a lived philosophy, very rarely articulated, of how to transform sufferings into prayer and generosity, because he never once carried himself as if he were entitled to something else. He was always available to other people as if he were the richer party, as if he had more to offer, not out of a sense of haughtiness or arrogance, but out of this sense of charity and gratitude for life itself. And that's not something you can find in an object. You have to find his grandchildren. You have to find his children, and you have to see how it shows up in their life. And then you have to be curious and say, where'd you get that from? Where do you learn that from? And then you say, oh, we learned it from this person, the way he embodied it. That to me is another way of thinking about legacy that's so much more powerful than the stuff I'm leaving behind an inheritance. That's good too, but it's different.
What he left behind weren't things that can necessarily be counted. You're reminding me of this word pleonexia. It is a Greek word that when translated might mean covetousness, which is actually a harder word to say in the English language. But pleonexia, it's this Greek word that kind of is when we are obsessed with acquiring more of things that can be counted. And so that can be more wealth. In today's terms, it might be more followers. It might be more friends, whether those friends are in real life or those are friends on Facebook or any other app. It's more of the things that can be counted. And there's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with social media inherently, right? But the problem is when we're always pursuing the things that can be counted, we often forsake the intangibles. And what you're talking about, leaving behind a legacy that often can't be counted, those are often the best legacies to leave behind. Now, sure, I have life insurance, so if I die, I want my wife and daughter to be able to pay the mortgage and buy groceries. And so I feel great about that. But also, it's not about acquiring things just for the sake of more. It's about identifying what enough is. And you leave behind enough. But in the wake of what you leave behind, there are those intangibles that you can't count, you can't necessarily hold on to. And I think that's what Arnold's talking about here with leaving no trace. Of course, you're going to leave a trace, but you may not leave behind those things that must be counted.
That's so good. That's so good, man. And like you said with the life insurance example, there is a good in being able to leave behind things that are counted. So for instance, in Black culture, a lot of Black American culture, a lot of conversations are happening around generational wealth and around this idea of setting up our children to be in a position economically that perhaps our parents or grandparents couldn't afford to put us in, so that they can have more options for education, mobility, and so on, so that our children and grandchildren will be able to travel around the world and acquire all of these amazing experiences. And so that's a really valuable thing that I think is worth not condemning and worth encouraging in a proper context. But then what makes all of that meaningful is that you give people a way of looking at life and a way of living life that says, this is what things are for. Because if I leave behind the things or the power to acquire them without a philosophy that contextualizes those things in a meaningful way, you just become more capable of greater evil.
I think that's a great point, because I can leave behind what seems great. I can leave behind millions of dollars, $1 billion, right? And that sounds awesome. Who doesn't want to receive $1 billion? But then if you're not equipped to handle it, it becomes the biggest burden. One of the greatest gifts that my mother accidentally gave me is a life of poverty growing up, because we didn't actually have enough. Getting more was enough for us in some sense, because we didn't have enough. If the electricity was turned off, it's because we didn't have enough money, right? If there were cockroaches scattering all across the kitchen, it's because we didn't have enough bug spray at the time, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have well-being in some sense, but what we learned about was the deprivation that we were going through. It was strengthening in a way, right? And it made me the type of person that $1 billion would have done the exact opposite. There's that old saying about how hard times make tough men, and then tough men make soft times, and soft times make weak men. And it's a perpetual cycle. And so if you just leave behind the pleonexia, the things that can be counted, what happens? You don't leave behind those intangibles that show you what to do with the things that can be counted.
Or that give you an appreciation of what it took to create them in the first place. There are so many problems today that are not the result of prosperity being intrinsically evil, but that are the result of prosperity being inherited without an accompanying value system that helps us appreciate how we got to this position in the first place.
Well, we're going to keep talking about legacy and also the legacy of stuff and what we leave behind. Arnold, I would encourage you to check out the Museum of Things. We did this 6-part short film series called Fragments. It was directed by Danny Martinez, Danny Unknown as we call him. And it's 6 episodes, and we made for free the Museum of Things. Anyone listening to this can go listen to or watch that episode of the Museum of Things. And I just got this new domain, TK, museumoftthings.xyz.
Oh, me likey.
You can find it over there. You just have to log in to Patreon. It's absolutely free to have an account over there, and you can watch the Museum of Things. It might be my favorite episode from that entire series. It's episode number 5. Episode number 1 is free as well if you want to check that out. And then our Audio Plus subscribers over on Patreon have access to all 6 episodes of that short film series called Fragments. Before we get back to our callers, Malabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer the Patreon community chat's question of the week.
Yes, indeed. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, minimal maxim. You can find this episode's maxims in the show notes at theminimalists.com/podcast, and every minimal maxim ever at minimalmaxims.com. We'll also deliver our weekly show notes directly to your inbox, including 7 new maxims every Monday for free if you sign up for our email newsletter at theminimalists.email. We'll never send you spam or junk or advertisements, but we will start your week with a dose of simplicity. What is the question of the week this week?
If you were to die today, what would you leave behind?
Oh, what a question. Now, when you hear that question, if you were to die today, what would you leave behind? Some of it's about the pleonexia. By the way, shout out to Rob Bell for that term. That's where I got it from. And, you know, that's okay. I might be leaving behind, I know I'm going to, if I were to die today, I'm going to leave behind a car and a house. I'm also going to leave behind some burdens like a mortgage that I'm still trying to pay off, right? But I want to be really careful about what am I leaving behind in terms of the countable things. But then what am I leaving behind in terms of those intangibles? So before we get to our pithy answers, TK, let's hear how some of our listeners answered this question.
Andy said, I'd leave behind some amazing stories and plenty for my family and friends to laugh about. Oh, and a sweet motorcycle.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, especially if someone really wants that motorcycle. And then, of course, I think where we often go wrong, TK, is we say, I'm holding on to this because I want to pass it down to my kids, but maybe my kids don't want this at all. And the thing that was such a joy for me could be a burden for them. And so I need to be able to see it through their eyes as well. Cheryl had this to say.
I'd leave behind the memories of a badass bitch.
Oh, same girl. Yeah, the memories thing is fascinating because those too will fade as well. I mean, I will be remembered by you if I were to die today, I'm assuming. But at some point...
What's your name again?
Hey, I am not my name, right?
Hey!
That is just a label. I am a finite point of awareness within an infinite, never-expanding universe.
I like how you stopped at fine. Like, I'm a fine point of awareness,
a
baby.
badass bitch. Shout out to Cheryl for that one. But of course, the memories also fade. So yes, you'll leave behind some memories, some really pleasant memories. You'll also leave behind some memories of hurt and pain and grief. And that's all part of it, right? You can't have one without the other. That's the yin and the yang of life. Of course, we all want to leave. I want to be remembered for this. But actually, the weird thing is I won't care once I'm gone what I'm remembered for. And then eventually all of those memories will fade as well. TK will pass away. Malabama will. And 1,000 years from now, actually 100 years from now, there won't be people around who remembered their interactions with me. Andrea had this to say.
I would leave behind my friends and family's constructs of Andrea.
Ah, there you go. Andrea is just a name, right? What about Becky?
Becky said, the meaningful things I would leave behind are my art, my garden, and the lessons I teach my son. The rest is mostly a bunch of crap I still need to declutter.
Yeah, there is something about like, oh, I'll get to that someday, right? But then someday never comes, and then now someone else is forced to handle it, deal with it, walk through it, declutter it, pare it down, worry about it, take care of it, right? And so what I love about Becky's astute comment here, she's realizing like I'd leave behind some things that are really valuable for my family. Yeah. I'd also leave behind some things that, let's be honest, they don't have any value at all because it's just clutter.
Yeah.
One more here. This one's from Bree.
When you pass, you don't have any control anymore. My goal is to have little to no possessions, no debt, money, or real estate. But what is left is already assigned to whomever I've assigned it to.
Wow.
I think that's something that's important. There's this essay on our website, and I would encourage folks to check it out. It's called Scared to Death of Death. We rarely talk about death. In fact, we did a whole episode with Dr. Zach Bush called Simplifying Death. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Because talking about death it's this part of life that for some reason we're so terrified of. It's almost as though we mention it and it becomes more real. But if not, I can live on in perpetuity as long as I don't think about or mention death. But of course, that prevents us from doing a lot of the things that are going to make our death and that whole process much easier for our loved ones. So having a last will and testament. Do I want a do not resuscitate, which is something that I have, right? And so what am I doing to prepare for death? That's what that essay is about. Scared to death of death. Here is the sort of checklist of basic mechanical things I can do to give myself and my family a peace of mind when I do inevitably pass away.
What a considerate approach, too. That's incredibly difficult to do because you don't know when you're going to go. And it's easy to think, I've got some time. I don't have to get this done today. But there's going to come a day where that's simply not true, right? And so that takes a lot of meticulousness and charity towards others to do that. And it's great because my dad growing up, my father is a pastor, and I was with him a lot for funerals and for conversations that had to happen between family members when mom died, grandma died. And I would have no idea if it wasn't for just being a little boy sitting in those rooms with him, how many tense, uncomfortable, and ugly conversations happen about all sorts of things. And you would think it's just about the property or the car. It's about the Rolex. It's about the necklace. It's about the wedding dress. It's about the photo. It's about the bed sheets. It's about so many freaking things. And if you can handle that kind of stuff, like how Bree is saying, you eliminated a lot of that and you give this great gift to your family by protecting them from fighting over things during a period of grief where it just may be more difficult to think clearly.
And not only is it more difficult, you're absolutely right about that. Because it's more difficult, all of the emotions are amplified and heightened. And then all of a sudden, we know the conversation about the bed sheets is not actually about the bed sheets. It's about mom loved me more than you. Or no, mom didn't love you more than me. She loved us equally, and that's why I get half the bed sheets. And then we start cutting things up in half, and maybe we didn't even want those things. It's about what they represent to us. I have a friend, and her mother just died this year, and she didn't have a will set in place. And so her and her sisters, who get along really well, thankfully, but they're now struggling to figure out, what did mom actually want? We didn't know her intentions because she didn't spell it out for us. And so, in a way, one of the most compassionate things we can do for our loved ones is sitting down with them, putting together a will, and understanding that when something happens, it's going to be okay. I do want you to remember me, but I also don't want my lack of a will or a lack of clear instructions to be a burden for you, because it often is, and we don't talk about it until it's too late.
A big area where this happens a lot is diaries. People spend their entire lives writing down all of their private thoughts in diaries with the mutual understanding that this belongs to me and you're not going to read this. But so many conversations don't happen around what happens with those diaries after you die if you go first. Do you want me to read them? Do you want me to burn them? Do you want me to give them to a sibling, to your parents? What do you want? I mean, something like that is a great burden, because if some loved one dies and they leave behind 50 journals filled with all of these private thoughts. On one end, it's like, hey, this can be a way to hold on to them and remember them. Maybe I can honor them. Maybe they don't want this to go to waste, or maybe the best way to honor them is to burn them or give them away. Conversations like that, a little preparation ahead of time can really save your loved ones a lot when they're left behind with your stuff.
Yeah.
And those emotions are so amplified that we often make decisions we would not make in a more rational state. What about you, listeners? If you were to die today, what would you leave behind? Let us know in the comments. Okay, TK, give me something pithy. If you were to die today, what would you leave behind? Can I have your beanie?
Yes, sir. It's all yours.
We'll
you can have it. You can have it now, man. You don't have to wait for me to die for that. My thought on this is I don't want to be remembered when I die as much as I want to be real when I'm alive. The funny thing about being remembered is, one, like you said, on a long enough timeline, we're all forgotten. But even within the context of being remembered, we don't have control over how we're remembered. The world changes. It moves in cycles. And you being seen in a certain way today could be the complete opposite 100 years from now. I can make my whole life about being the mean guy. Yeah, TK was the guy who was never intimidated. And the world's understanding of what it means to be mean in 100 years can be completely different. And everyone sees me as weak. I can say, hey, I'm all about democracy. That's how I want to be remembered. And the world, the political regime could be so different 100 years from now. And I might seem like the biggest coward. Every generation proves its ability to be completely unimpressed with yesterday's heroes. And there's no insulation from that possibility for me. And so what I want to leave behind is not a preoccupation with being remembered or any attachment to how people see me, but I want to leave behind a clear conscience. I want to know when I go that no matter what the world makes of it in 100 years, I'm at peace with my conscience.
What about you, Alabama? Who's going to get that cardigan you're wearing?
Yenzi, you cold?
I take it.
Goodwill's getting all my stuff. It's just like a library. I just cycle books, clothes, everything at probably Goodwill.
I think this question was really interesting to me because it made me think about the actual things I'm leaving behind. Mm-hmm. There are things that I use every day or every week or every month, right? And those things will have to be dealt with if I were to die suddenly, right? I'm going to leave behind a lot of black t-shirts.
So many black t-shirts.
And some black pants and now some tennis shoes. I've switched over to tennis shoes recently. That's been fascinating. And so, but those are just cosmetic sort of things that I'm not attached to now. So I really don't care what you do with them. Mm-hmm. But I've had to also figure out that even the things that I really enjoy now, I'm going to be gone. I don't care what you do with them either. I injected some levity into my last will, and it tells Bex and Ryan that they're allowed to play soccer with my decapitated head. It actually says this in a legal document. And I made sure with my attorney it was okay that we could do that.
Oh my gosh. Only you would go through the pain of making sure that gets spelled out legally.
And because, what a great way to laugh one last time. Because I don't mean that literally, although in a way I do. I don't care what they do. And for some reason they wanted to embalm my head and use it as a soccer ball. I don't know the legalities behind that, but that's not what it's about. It's about, okay, what do I actually want to leave behind? Some smiles. Oh, how nice is that? And so my pithy answer is to worry about your legacy is to obsess over how the past will look in the future, both of which destroy the beauty of the present moment. And I say that as a person who used to be obsessed with legacy. What am I going to leave behind? What am I going to be remembered for? What will people think about me when I'm gone? But then that started transferring to other places. What will people think about me when I exit the room? Okay, who cares? Why do I care about that? I care about it because I want that thrill, that feel-good feeling of, oh, they kind of like me. Okay, fine. But when I'm gone, I'm not going to have access to that feeling either way.
Yeah. For better and for worse.
That's right. All right, we're just getting started, y'all. We still have a stack of callers to talk to. But first, real quick for right here or right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. Sunday Symposium is back, y'all.
Yes.
August 25th, 2024. TK, Alabama. What can you tell me about Sunday Symposium? Let's start with you, TK.
Oh, man, it's the most wonderful time of the month. What an awesome time, because we are getting better and better at facilitating the experience of connection, conversation, and community. This isn't just a live show. This isn't just a podcast in person. This is the time for us to come together and share coffee and sunlight and fresh air and conversation and hugs with one another. And I just love it because the people in the minimalist community are some of the best people in the world. And these are people that are coming out and coming together, not for the purpose of debating anybody about religion, politics, and all the stuff that people are spending all their time online doing, but for the purpose of coming together and getting to know one another and helping each other, as Ram Dass says, walk each other home. And you can feel that in the space. I think what we're doing is so special. Yes, I'm biased, but I've been to a lot of shows and a lot of different things like that. But I really love what we're doing, not just for the entertainment factor, but for the humanity factor. And that's becoming so much more important as the ability to reach out and shake a hand, give a hug, see a smile, look someone in the eyes is becoming an ever increasingly rare commodity.
Yeah, that sense of community is really important. And that's really what makes it stand out, is the ability to have that centralized location where we all can gather and talk about what's important to us and work through things together. You see familiar faces, people that come every month or every time we throw these events. But you also see new faces coming in that are bringing in their own different energies of curiosity. And it really is that connection. Lots of hugs as an extrovert. I mean, man, you guys fuel me for the rest of the month. But just being able to connect with people on a very vulnerable level, that's really special. That's really precious. And being able to support each other with victories and struggles, that's an incredible thing to be able to do.
That's so well said. I think about half the people who show up at the live events are just there to verify that Malabama is not AI generated.
The amount of times that people asked that in the Everything Tour was amazing to me.
So we paused Sunday Symposium because we went on the Everything Tour and we had 7 months of the Everything Tour. We were just doing one event a month throughout California. You can find all of those events, by the way, all of our past events over at theminimalists.com/previous. That's all of our previous tour stops from the last 11 tours over the course of 14 years, I guess. But we're bringing back Sunday Symposium. It's a local, loving, kind-hearted event, community event, and it's really small. So I have good news and I have bad news for you, TK, Alabama.
Okay.
Actually, it's more like good news and good bad news. The good bad news is I put the tickets up yesterday, and within a few hours, they were just all gone.
Oh, okay.
Because this is a small venue in West Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
And so I just made the event live. And then all of a sudden, I guess Eventbrite sends a notice out to people who have attended before. And then boom, all of a sudden, it's just full. But thankfully for you listening to this, I set aside a handful of tickets, a couple dozen of them, and they're free tickets. And if you want to get on our wait list, we'll notify you as soon as those tickets become available. You can find all the details at sundaysymposium.com. We're going to do a sound bath. We're going to do coffee and mingling. Of course, the Minimalists will give a talk there as well in a room that has fewer than 200 people. These really meaningful, intimate events that aren't worried about legacy. They're not worried about the past. They're not worried about the future. What we're concerned with is what's going on right here in front of us at these live events. I hope to see you there, sundaysymposium.com. Get on the wait list now. By the way, this sold out almost immediately without social media, without some sort of giant email blast going out. These are people who are just interested in creating a dogma-free community. So all beliefs are welcome. All non-beliefs are welcome as well.
Can I just say one other thing I really like? The questions. They have an almost magical, unpredictability about them. When we're doing the show on the podcast, I love our questions. But I think because of the brand, because of the name, many people keep their questions focused on things that are very explicitly, overtly minimalistic. When we're at these live shows, you never know what's coming at you. When we're in Chicago, it seemed like every question was about sex and sexuality. And I had so many friends text me and they go, is that what the normal show is like? I go, no, I've never seen that before. We're at the Presbyterian Church, which is the first time we performed in a church. And there were so many questions about spirituality. And I'm thinking that's the theme. And then one of the last questions, there's a guy that's like, all right, it looks like there's a spirituality theme here. I need to come at this from an evolutionary perspective and challenge one of the ideas about contentment that I'm hearing being espoused. And that was interesting and that was fun. So it just feels like there's more of a no holds barred kind of thing where people are truly asking what is interesting to them and pouring out their hearts. And we have the chance to interact with them in a way that's sometimes funny, that's sometimes tear-jerking, that's sometimes very sober, sometimes very motivational, but we never know where it's going to go. And there's just a magical quality about it that I think everybody finds value in.
There's such a tightrope walking going on there in an interesting way because you're like, I don't know what to expect from the questions because we're there for you. We don't know what to expect either. It's not some big presentation. We've got our PowerPoint slides out and Malabama's over there doing her song and dance, although that would be awesome. We show up in the way that the people show up. What do we need to discuss today? We're not here to teach you or educate you or even to necessarily entertain you. What's on your mind? What are you struggling with? What can't you let go of right now? Let's talk about that. What's going on behind the stuff? So come on out, sundaysymposium.com. Get on the wait list. We'll let you know as soon as some of those additional tickets open up. Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hello, this is Britt from Portland. I've come up with a new habit that I wanted to share. When I'm in a situation where I am waiting unexpectedly and have nothing on me but my phone, I will go to my Photos app, type in usually a season or a month, so I could say summer or I could say June or so on. I look at my photos for that time period and I delete all the duplicate photos that I don't want or don't need. And it doesn't matter what the year is. I don't get bogged down in memories because it's just the season or just the month. This has really worked for me, so I wanted to share. Thank you for your hard work. Bye-bye.
Britt, thank you so much for that comment. For anyone else who has a listener tip or insight about this episode or any other episode, leave a comment on Patreon or YouTube, or better yet, we would love to hear your voice on the show. Send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. All right, that's the first 33% of episode 455. We'll see you on Patreon for the full Maximal edition, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Questions like, how do I determine whether or not I want to have kids? What's the best way to identify and understand my values? How can I connect with my partner's family if they don't accept me? Plus a million more questions and simple living segments over on the Minimalists private podcast. We also have an outstanding home tour from one of our listeners this week. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. Big thanks to Earthing Studios for providing the recording space. On behalf of Ryan Nicodemus, TK Coleman, Malabama, post-production Peter, Jeff and Dave over at Spire, Yin Z, and the rest of our team, I'm Joshua Fields Milburn. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.